Welcome, ModelFA's David DeCelle here, CEO of ModelFA and your host of the ModelFA podcast. And I am very excited to bring our guest to you today, Sarah Ecklein. And she is the owner of Trust and Honor. And I'm excited to bring her to you today because I think this is an extremely valuable service that your clients can really utilize. So we're going to be unpacking this together. But with that said, Sarah, welcome to the show.
David, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and being here. I know it's been a while.
I know we had a reschedule or two, caused by me, of course. So I appreciate your flexibility, but we finally made it. Even your email this morning, hey, we scheduled this a while ago. Just want to confirm that we're still good to go. So it's been a long time coming, and I'm happy to finally have you on the show.
Yeah, likewise.
Cool. Well, let's get rocking. I guess share with us, but before we get into what you actually do, tell us a little bit about your backstory. Like, what was your professional journey, from school to today? What were some of the steps in between?
Uh, well, it's a journey. Um, well, I'll start that really, I graduated in 2010. So, I was the hard class and no one was hiring. I loved cooking. And so actually cooked professionally for 4 years before, doing the work that I do. But anyways, when I was cooking, and honestly, I did it a few years too long, I realized it wasn't quite where I wanted to be. And then I was witness to my first death. My partner at the time, her aunt, we knew that she was declining. She had brain cancer, but we got the call that she was referred to hospice. And, I just left. I was literally working the line and someone filled my spot and we drove up to Northern California and really was with her the last 3 days of her life. And that just really had a profound effect on my life. I think really what happened was I was forced into the present moment and, all the worry and busyness of life just melted away. And I also noticed that I had this natural, like kind of internal wanting to lean in and be present with her through her dying. And I noticed that most people didn't have that experience. So that's what really began, I would say, my professional journey. I thought I would be a hospice nurse and started going back to school. And then I was doing some clinical hours at a skilled nursing facility. And I realized nursing wasn't quite the right fit, but there was still this kind of end of life care piece that I couldn't put down, I couldn't walk away from. It was just so obvious of this is where I felt called to serve. And eventually I started working for a professional fiduciary out in Sacramento, California, and the rest is history. I describe it as like a head and heart alignment. We'll get into defining what a professional fiduciary is. In California, we actually have a very small license. There's only about 900 actively licensed fiduciaries in the state. But yeah, it kind of brought in of course, it brought in this end of life care piece for me, but it's like being of service, helping people. And it's also very interesting because every client that I serve, I typically serve in some different capacity, wearing multiple hats, and every client's life is just so unique. So I'm always learning.
Love it. Well, it's interesting how life puts you in particular circumstances that ultimately inspire you to change your career path. And sometimes those circumstances are positive. Sometimes, maybe not so much. But even in the situations to where they're not positive in the moment, it can be positive moving forward. And I think back to I believe I had introduced you to him, Blake Brewer with Legacy
Mm.
Leathers. He has a
Yeah.
whole business now that is centered around his father's tragic death.
Yeah, he has
and that
such a
could,
powerful story. And yes, we have connected. Thanks for making
good.
that connection. He actually came on my podcast
Oh,
and
awesome.
yeah, we had a great conversation. Yeah, but I mean, I know it's one of those like most unfortunate things, but I mean, I think for me, so much of, the blessing of death, and our own mortality is that it really can, if we lean into that reality, it brings full focus, the truth of our existence, which is life. And, I think we're a really death denying culture. The more that I do this work, the more that I also podcast and I try to reach people upstream proactively, because only 1 in 3 people actually have an estate plan in the United States, which is just a really sad reality. I'm sure that probably doesn't surprise you. So few families, just even have $1,000 in savings. The statistics are grim. So, why would people be thinking proactively? But I think it's one of the greatest gifts that we can give our loved ones and also ourselves.
Well, 1 in 3, that's actually higher than I would have guessed. There's still obviously a lot of work to do to make that number higher, but it's better than I would have expected because there's a lot of people out there, so um,
Yeah. And we can also get in. I mean, we'll see how much time we have, but yeah, the conversation can go a few places.
well, one place that it won't go, but maybe in like a part two at some point, I'd like to think that part of the reason why my wife decided to marry me is because of my cooking skills. So perhaps we'll have to go back and forth on some recipes. I've never been paid to cook, but I have found my wife as a result of cooking.
Oh, that's good. She's lucky. It's funny now, being married and having a little one, it's like the minute that you're, expected to cook, it takes all the joy out of it.
Well, she busts my chops because as I was courting her, so to speak, the meals, were amazing and over the top, and even had like a little tabletop fireplace thing that I'd light before the dinners, and then we get married and my true colors come out, and I can eat the same exact thing every single day. And she's like, "Come, can you cook, please? Like this has been a big bait and switch." I'm like, "Gotcha." So I still need to carve out some time, but she's also a great cook too. So we'll switch off. But usually for lunches, at the very least, I just eat the same thing every day, and then a couple times a week we'll go above and beyond and cook something nice. But it is a lot. It is a lot to do that. But anywho, um, so walk me through. You mentioned 900 fiduciaries in California. Are you referencing like a financial advisor fiduciary, a different type of fiduciary? Help educate us.
Yeah, yeah, no. So, yeah, I don't manage money. I don't give financial advice. So, professional fiduciary is really an umbrella term, and under that umbrella, I can act as someone's conservator. I can act as someone's trustee, as executor, and I can also act as someone's agent, making both financial and healthcare decisions. So that's for the most part the work that I do. I really specialize in trust administration and just being, a younger fiduciary. I would say the average age is, I think it's 60 plus. I work a lot with clients in the planning phase, so people that are naming me in their estate plan in successor roles like successor trustee and an alternate agent in both their power of attorney for finance and their advanced healthcare directive. So, yeah, I would say, there's a growing need for actually people that do this work. I'm based in Silicon Valley. So, what I'm finding is also banks, so like corporate trustees, for example, are having higher and higher minimums. A lot of them also don't like complexity. So just for example, like a special needs trust, or also if someone's invested pretty heavily in real estate, a lot of times they won't take the case. They won't serve the client. And so that's where I think one of the pieces of where our profession did kind of pop up and have this growing need. The other piece is families are really changing, right? People are having fewer children or no children at all. Families are not living, right down the street from each other anymore. Divorce rates are up, remarriage, blended families, all of this kind of adds layers of complexity, especially when we're talking about estate planning and aging parents. So I think working with a neutral party can bring a lot of peace to families. And, definitely a lot of people, I would say in the Bay Area, what I'm finding, and of course, these are clients that need my services and are working with me. They were heavily invested in their careers and maybe didn't make those same investments in kind of the community and emotional support. So now as they're aging, they're realizing, oh, maybe they aren't married, maybe they don't have children, and who can support them as they age. Professional fiduciaries can. And I think one of the unique pieces of our profession is that we can act as an agent. From my understanding, a corporate trustee can't do that. So, for people that really need that full support, there are people like me that do this work. That being said, I know your listeners aren't only in California. I believe we're only one in two states that have licensing. I don't know what the second state is. I'm always trying to find it.
But can you work with people outside of California, or do you need to stay within California for it?
You know, because most states don't have licensing, I don't think there's any restrictions, but I would say, especially for people that need support with like healthcare decision making, it's good to have someone like boots on the ground. It's also there's a piece like as people age and maybe their finances, or their assets are going down in size, knowing the piece of social services and being able to make those referrals is a big part of the job as well. And so I really know like my local counties well. I wouldn't, I'd be starting from scratch. There is it's called the National Guardianship Association. I can include and share that for you so listeners can go to that website and you can search for professionals that do this work in your local state. Just know that at least at this point in time, there's no licensing in most other states. And I think that that's really where like for financial advisors, where, I think so much similar to my work, we have extensive networks, right? We want to partner our clients with creating that right team proactively. So, also knowing your local estate planning attorney and asking, do you know any professionals that do work like this? I think that really can help the client. I find that, financial advisors next to estate planning attorneys are my main referral source because they're always kind of comprehensively planning and supporting their clients. So that's where I love reaching people like your audience.
Yes, because from my understanding, your client base is the end client, but then you serve as, or advisors serve as sort of like a COI for you, where you can work closely with them to in turn work with their clients. I'm curious because I don't know your industry at all. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm
Doesn't
sure
surprise me.
and I'm sure, there's nuances, depending on the complexity of the person's situation and what they're actually enlisting you for help. But like, how do people engage with you like monetarily? Is it like hey, there's an upfront fee to get this stuff in motion? Is it, hey, there's a retainer on a yearly basis to sort of keep me on speed dial, so to speak, or hey, I get paid when I'm actually doing the thing, when that thing happens. Like what, like I know the pricing models, all the different pricing models for advisors inside and out, but how does a client engage with you in that way?
Yeah, so when I work with clients in the planning phase, I charge like a one-time flat intake fee. And then over the years, as as their estate plan might be changing, as their lives might be changing. But I'm not actually filling that fiduciary role yet. I'm more just working alongside the client. I would charge an hourly rate for, whatever is needed. But at that point, the ball's really in the client's court. I have some clients where they like to have kind of an annual meeting and, it gives them a lot of peace of mind knowing that I'm onboarded and also we have, a close relationship so that, once, they do need my services, I'm not this complete stranger stepping
Hmm.
in. And then yeah, once I am acting as trustee, I'm charging a percentage. That's my business model. And some professional fiduciaries are only charging an hourly rate. It really, kind of depends. I would say that's where we're a small profession. Licensing began in 2007. So there's just a lot of evolution, and I think there'll continue to be, especially over the course of my career. I came to this work about 11 years ago, and you know, what I also know is that our profession, we've been trying to have the ability to establish professional corporations and have them, be able to have a fiduciary capacity. But at this point, we're always named as individuals and documents. So that's, I would say, the biggest downside of our profession, because obviously an individual runs into the same risk that everyone does, right?
Right.
Death, incapacity, and all of that. Yeah.
Now, in terms of like meeting with the client, every year,
Mm.
where I'm not clear is like where does your expertise stop and an estate planner's starts and vice versa? Like
Mm.
help me understand like how your role is different than the estate planning role and how your professions intersect as well.
Yeah, that's a good question because I would say, people either think that I'm a financial advisor or an estate planning attorney. And I would say that in some states, estate planning attorneys may be doing the work that I'm doing. In California, if you're an attorney, if you're a CPA, their license allows them to do the work that I'm doing. I'm just finding that, they're not really doing that work. They're not doing this
Yeah.
work for multiple different reasons. Yeah, but an estate planning attorney is really, they're the ones that are drafting the actual documents. I'm the one that's really stepping into that role when the time comes. I would say that the relationship built, again, proactively, it really benefits the client and also gives me kind of how I describe it is that the estate plan is really like the solid framework. This is what's giving me the legal authority to act when services are needed. But I have my own internal intake forms, again, building that relationship, gathering information up front, like you can write a letter of intent that I add to the file. All of this kind of colors in those that outline and fine lines. And at the end of the day, this is about carrying out people's final wishes. Sure, the estate plan can communicate a lot of that, but I find the more emotional and relational, also the family dynamics, knowing all of that information up front can really help me do that job.
So I have two examples that I want to share and then throw it over to you to really understand the unique advantages in working with someone like you, juxtaposed against these two examples. So I just heard this example yesterday from my business partner, Dan Allison. In his prior life, about 20 years ago, he had a company that sold for a lot of money, and he had a business partner. Business partner was much older than him and continued to build and amassed a pretty sizable net worth. And out of nowhere, he passed away. At the time, he had about $70 million,
Wow.
and he hadn't updated his estate plan in 13 years.
Oh,
And Dan was still named as, I believe it's his trustee. and
Wow.
they're from Nebraska. So these are Dan's words, not mine. But when he told the story yesterday, he said every hillbilly in Nebraska that in some way, shape, or form was related to him started coming through the woodworks, and it created a lot of
I
stress and
bet.
anxiety and work for Dan. The other story, and I'll be more general with this, I was speaking with an advisor who was alongside an attorney helping a client with an estate plan, and there were two siblings of these parents that they were working with, and they wanted to name the daughter as the trustee, and the advisors advised against that because her brother has a really bad drug addiction, in and out of rehab, like living on the streets, living in the house, living on the streets, just like a yo-yo. And the folks, the advisor and the attorney advised against it because they were like, there's almost nothing worse you could do to your daughter, like making
Yeah.
her having to deal with that.
Yeah.
So with those two scenarios in mind, what's the advantage of hiring and working with someone like yourself?
Yeah, well, the first example, I do see. I would say that's not really the work that I totally specialize in. Do you know, was his estate going through probate? Are you
Um,
you're not sure?
I'm not sure. I'd be
Mhm.
making something up if I answered that.
Yeah. It's let's talk with a second example because that's very much the scenario that I run into, especially, I would say downstream once a case is active, and also proactively with families not wanting to burden, you know, one of the children, quote unquote, maybe the responsible one.
Hmm.
So I would say, I don't want to say it's nothing like a half, but maybe a quarter of my cases, my active cases, again, it's from exactly that scenario. A sibling that was managing, their brother or sister's money, and, after the parents passed, and they don't want the responsibility, the relationships strained. Sometimes the relationship's absolutely ruined and not even salvageable at that point. And so they're resigning, and they don't want the headache. They can't work with their sibling anymore, and they're going to name a professional fiduciary to take over. So this is a lot of where I love reaching people proactively. And that's great advice, just knowing that the attorney and the financial advisor were advising, this person, don't burden, your, it was a daughter.
Yeah,
Was that this?
daughter.
Yeah. Don't burden your daughter with this responsibility, because what that looks like, and what I would kind of anticipate just hearing about that, is probably money is going to stay in trust for that person's life, because they'll probably never be able to manage that money. And honestly, giving money outright can sometimes just be a death sentence, right? It's just really
Is what it
horrible.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, really horrible. So that's where working with a neutral party, and I would say I do work with a lot of people, whether they struggle from drug and alcohol abuse, whether they're mentally ill, whether, all sorts of disabilities. And the gift in that is that their sibling can just stay the sibling, or if they don't want to maintain contact for whatever reason, they don't have to. And I think what I find is that when families are choosing to do that proactively, they never are kind of, the siblings never put in that position to begin with. It's a lot of responsibility and burden, but downstream that can look like, the siblings are never talking again. And I mean, that's so much of why I started my own podcast. It's called The Legacy of Love, because I think most people know these stories of families torn apart, whether it's that scenario or families battling out in court. And that's where I think we're so disconnected to the power of that this work is. You know, and I hate to say that the estate plan is really just kind of where we start. From there, there's so much that we can do to kind of comprehensively plan to really kind of set the stage for our loved ones, to know what our wishes are. We can write letters of intent that sits alongside our estate planning documents, and can really kind of get clear of this is what I wanted to leave for you. I find more times than not, when people, and this is the 1/3 of people that are planning, right? They aren't really understanding the actual function of their documents. And that's, I think just such a disservice because, just for example, I find most times, well, I should say half of the times when people are coming into my office, working with me in the planning phase, they're only thinking about after death. And while that's a big piece of an estate plan, a lot of this is about having conversations about your incapacity and planning for that. Who's in charge? Who would you want to be making decisions? And if you're not really understanding the entire kind of function of the estate plan and how it works, how are we going to be able to, set up a comprehensive plan? And the other piece I find is that people typically aren't really following up once they execute the plan and having conversations with the people that need to know. So what that could look like is maybe your children, but also your proxies. So proxies will just define as, maybe the successor trustee, your healthcare decision maker. A lot of times people are just naming these people and shoving the documents in the drawer and never thinking about it again and not updating it. And that's again where it's just a huge disservice because these people aren't ready to take on the job and they really aren't clear what you want at the end of the day. So, yeah, that's so much of what lights me up of the work that I do and why I have a podcast and love coming on other people's podcasts and spreading the word.
Well, one of the things that, because my wife and I, when we got married, we put together our estate plan.
Hmm.
And one of the things that frustrates me with attorneys is even in conversation, a lot of them speak like their documents are written. And it's like, dude, I don't know what you just said. So
Yeah.
am I accurate in saying that part of your role, not the entirety of your role, but part of your role is to take these complicated documents and just explain it to me like I'm five, for lack of a better way to put it? Like, are you helping kind of translate some of the legal jargon so they're comprehended appropriately, or am I misunderstanding that portion of your
Yeah, I
role?
would say, I always say I can't give legal advice. So that's really where attorneys should be doing the job. And that's a lot of actually what I love kind of preaching on my podcast. You should be working with an attorney that A, you like and you trust, but I think lastly and most importantly, that you feel like you can ask the stupid questions. Come on over the podcast. You actually might like some of the episodes because I interview a lot of estate planning attorneys, and really the people that I bring on are the people that really lead from their hearts. And actually, a lot of them I found out had a background in teaching before becoming
Mm.
attorneys. One, Ellen Cookman comes to mind. She's based also in the Bay Area, and she has a YouTube channel and has just a ton of wonderful content to provide people to answer all those questions of what these documents are. So yeah, I really do feel that that is the estate planning attorney's job. That being said, when I am meeting with my clients, we are, of course, talking about their documents. And again, usually what that looks like, if they're coming to me only talking about after death, I'm also clarifying, well, if are you wanting to name me in only your trust document? Are you wanting to also name me in your power of attorney? And that's where, honestly, after having so many conversations with not even clients, but also prospective clients where I'm asking that question of just getting clear what kind of service you want, and they don't know and they've already met with the attorney. That's where I was like, wow, I really thought attorneys would be spending the time and educating their clients, and it's absolutely clear. And I think this goes back to your point that most aren't.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't totally. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, find an attorney who can translate some of those documents because there are even
Yeah.
yeah, there are some instances where I was just like I don't know what this means. Like explain it.
Yeah.
And then
Can you break this down? Yeah,
yeah.
and I'm actually kind of curious, like I anticipate that, obviously professions are going to need to change and evolve. I mean, professional fiduciaries, absolutely, but even I think having the access to information and content, it's going to, empower the consumer, the client, right, to be more informed, but also raise the bar and the expectation of of the professionals that we're working with. And I think that's a good thing because that's where I find that, you know, the estate planning as a whole and really setting your loved ones up for that, what I, call that legacy of love and not just leaving a mess, that still can happen if you have an estate plan. And I absolutely see that. And I think it's so much that people aren't understanding their documents and conversations are only being had behind closed doors, and there's a lot more that we can do. So anyways, hopefully my my little piece and podcast and coming on podcasts like this helps spread the word. Yeah.
Well, speaking of spreading the word, like let's say I'm a financial advisor. I've tagged in an attorney to help work alongside me and my clients, and it's time to either do an estate plan or refresh an estate plan. What's a what's the proper way to try to pull in someone like yourself? So if I'm an advisor, I'm speaking with the client, I want to tee up Sarah. Like, what does that conversation look like as to why I'd want to pull you in?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm finding it's attorneys that are referring me. Sometimes financial advisors will start with making the introduction. I find that usually when that happens, it feels a little bit of like putting the cart before the horse. Because sometimes the clients, I mean, most of the time they just need to update their estate planning documents if they are working with the financial advisor. But sometimes they're not quite understanding that. So that's where I think people meeting with their attorney first and then that referral being made. And, we professional fiduciaries really come to this work from all different kind of avenues and backgrounds. I find some are coming to it more from a background of banking and finance. Others are coming more from a background of like clinical work. So a lot of social workers and also like retired nurses, for example. So that's where interviewing, I would say a minimum of three professional fiduciaries, if that's something that you feel you need, and would benefit the family is I would say the minimum, because we're gonna all have a different approach, a different background, and I really feel like with this role, with this work, you want to feel really good about the people that you name and have that good relationship. So that's so much of what I lead with, and I definitely, I would say I say no more so to clients than yes, just because I want to be working with clients that want to work with me, and vice versa, right?
Hmm. For sure. Well, one of the staple questions before we start wrapping up here in the moment is I ask all of our guests a book that's had an impact on them, and I do so as a way to distill a reading list for the folks listening. And the book that you chose, I did not write down the author, so feel free to remind me.
Oh, okay.
But it's called A Return to Love. Who's that by? And what's the impact that it's had on you?
Yeah, that it's by Mariam Williamson. Um, that book, honestly, when I read that book was after kind of in that in between before I found the work that I'm doing and leaving my cooking job and after that 3 day of death. So I was just kind of in this like open soul searching place, and it was that book that you just read it at the right time, exactly with what you need. Um, if for listeners that aren't aware of the book, it's I think it was written back in the 90s, and it's Miriam's. It's basically her kind of synopsis and thoughts on A Course of Miracles, which is a whole kind of spiritual practice. And it really kind of just distills things down of that we can either be moving from a place of fear or from really moving from that place of love. And actually thinking about this now, I think that's so much of what influences like my work and also my message, especially with estate planning. Like, so maybe I'll kind of we'll wrap up the conversation with saying that I think most people are coming to estate planning from this place of worry and fear and not knowing. And my message is really, let's first really connect to the power that we each all have, which is really that loving presence, and then be intentional about setting up our team and our estate plan, and also setting up our loved ones by writing them love letters and, bringing like the whole family on board. I'm gonna work on this year of having a death dinner. Stay tuned. Maybe I'll come back and tell you how it goes. But I think that this is where we need to change the way that we're approaching this work specifically, because it doesn't only just change, our lives, and also I would say it could even change our identity, right? Of how we're choosing to show up for ourselves and our family. But that has a whole ripple in the whole family line and future generations. So I think the more that we're connected to the power that this work has, the more that hopefully that motivates families and empowers families to do this important work. I have a free workbook for listeners. You can go to my website, trustandhonor.co, and download it. And really, it's an exercise to do to get intentional of what your wishes are, what your values are, what you want to leave your loved ones. And so wherever you're at in the estate planning journey, whether you've already have documents in place or maybe you don't and you know you need them, I would say it could benefit you. So yeah, of course, I know there'll be links in the show notes and all of that. So we'll make sure listeners can get that.
Well, it's interesting going from a place of fear to a place of love. I feel like just speaking in my own experience outside of estate planning, but a lot of what got me to a sustainable place was based on taking action out of fear of failing, out of fear of being poor, out of fear of rejection, like all that type of stuff. But what's gotten me to the next level was truly falling in love with what I do.
Yeah.
So I can see how that's applicable.
Oh, absolutely. I know. It applies to anything. I think that's where our intention matters so much. And we can forget that. We can really lose sight of that, especially with just, I know we're both kind of in the messy middle of life, right?
Hmm.
Aging parents and, I have a toddler, and it can be when you're just in life, it can be just so we're only moving from that reaction place. So that's where for me, like my meditation practice is like the foundation of my life. I cannot serve and show up fully without that. So yeah.
Love it. My meditation. I'm a little bit of a psychopath, but I do 3 minutes in 37-degree water in my cold plunge
Oh,
outside.
I love it.
Yeah, that's my reset at the beginning of every day. But um, Sarah, this has been a pleasure. So trust and honor Co is a website. There's a free resource on there. I assume folks can find you on LinkedIn as well.
Yes. Yep.
Last name is spelled Ecklein. Sarah, no H. We're not messing with the H in Sarah.
Yep.
So take a look on LinkedIn, take a look on the website. Sarah, it's a pleasure. I appreciate you hopping on. And it's been a long
Oh,
time coming. Finally, we've been able
yeah.
to do it. So appreciate
David,
it.
thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And for everyone tuning in, appreciate your time and attention. And we will catch you on the next episode. Take care.